She mopped the floors unnoticed every single day. But the moment she looked up, she saw the signs that even doctors might have missed. Within minutes, a black cleaning lady no one ever paid attention to saved the life of a millionaire who thought he was untouchable. The office tower glimmered in the morning light, its glass facade reflecting the rising sun, as if it were celebrating the start of another day in the heart of the city. Inside, everything was arranged to perfection. Polished floors, gleaming desks, and the quiet hum of ambition. In this world, the rhythm was dictated by power, wealth, and the relentless chase for success. But amid the sheen and the meticulous order, there existed another rhythm, one often unnoticed, one that rarely made its presence known beyond the corners of maintenance closets and janitorial carts. That rhythm belonged to Ruth Johnson, a black cleaning lady whose name would soon become etched in a story of courage, clarity, and life-saving intuition. Ruth had worked in the towering offices of Leonard Hayes for over 7 years. Leonard, a self-made millionaire CEO, was known for his sharp mind and cold efficiency. His name commanded respect, his fortune commanded envy, and his schedule left no room for distraction. Employees scurried along the corridors like clockwork, their focus solely on productivity and promotions, oblivious to the world outside their spreadsheet-laden screens. Ruth, on the other hand, navigated those same halls with quiet vigilance. She observed more than she cleaned, listened more than she spoke, and understood more than most cared to acknowledge. That Tuesday morning, Ruth began her routine as usual. She moved through the executive floor with the precision of someone who had memorized every desk, every chair, every detail of the office layout. Dusting, sweeping, sanitizing, these were her visible tasks. But her mind, sharp and unwavering, scanned faces, movements, and unspoken cues. It was during these early hours, as the building hummed with the beginnings of meetings and phone calls, that she noticed Leonard entering the conference room for his weekly briefing. At first glance, he seemed the same. Tailored suit, immaculate tie, confident stride. Yet Ruth's experience taught her that appearances were often deceiving. She saw it first in his hands. They trembled slightly when he picked up a cup of coffee, a subtle quiver that might escape the notice of assistants preoccupied with agendas and emails. Then she noticed his eyes, momentarily unfocused, darting across the room as if seeking a support that wasn't there. And finally, there was the shift in his posture. Shoulders slightly hunched, a faint pallor to his complexion that hinted at more than fatigue. Ruth paused mid-sweep, instinct sharpening her senses. She had seen enough, lived enough, and trusted enough of her intuition to know that these were warning signs. Signs that could easily be ignored by those wrapped up in their own worlds. As the morning progressed, Leonard's condition became more apparent. He excused himself from meetings, lingering near the doorway as if gathering strength. Colleagues exchanged glances, some whispering, others shrugging it off. "He's just stressed," someone muttered. "Probably not enough sleep," said another. But Ruth did not dismiss what she saw. She moved quietly toward the break room where Leonard had gone to fetch water. Her approach was careful, respectful, yet intentional. "Mr. Hayes?" she asked softly, her voice steady but gentle, carrying an authority that came not from position, but from lived experience. Leonard turned, attempting a polite smile, but it faltered. "Ruth," he managed, voice weak. "I'm fine. Just a little dizzy, that's all." Ruth studied him, her eyes unblinking, noting the irregular rhythm of his breathing and the subtle pallor that had now deepened. She understood that the words of reassurance, though sincere, could be misleading. She had grown up in a world where people often ignored the quiet, the unnoticed, the subtle signals. In many ways, her life had been shaped by observing, interpreting, and acting when others refused to see. And in this moment, she knew she could not allow the reassurance to mask the danger. "Sir," she said gently, yet with firmness that left no room for dismissal, "I've seen people pass off these symptoms before, and it's rarely harmless. Please, let me call someone. Just in case. Leonard hesitated. Pride, habit, and the CEO's ingrained sense of control held him back. He was a man accustomed to making decisions, to commanding the room, to managing crises on his terms. Yet Ruth's presence had a quiet weight. There was no judgment, no condescension, only observation, concern, and a moral clarity that could not be ignored. Her eyes, steady and unwavering, communicated a truth he could not dismiss. And so, with a reluctant nod, Leonard allowed Ruth to act. She called 911, calmly explaining the situation while ensuring he remained seated, safe, and hydrated. Minutes stretched, yet to Ruth, every second carried a measured urgency. When the paramedics arrived, they were met with a man who, by most appearances, seemed merely unwell, but under Ruth's insistence, thorough checks were conducted. The diagnosis was immediate and severe. Leonard was suffering from the early stages of a heart attack, a crisis that could have escalated fatally had it not been for her timely intervention. As Leonard was transported to the hospital, the magnitude of Ruth's actions began to settle in. It was not just the medical precision or the call for help. It was the moral courage, the perceptive awareness, and the refusal to allow the world's indifference to determine the outcome of a human life. Ruth, a woman whose work was often invisible, whose voice had historically been disregarded in boardrooms and corridors, had saved one of the most powerful men in the city. And yet, even in the hospital waiting room, Ruth remained quietly unassuming. She did not seek recognition, did not expect accolades, nor did she allow the media frenzy that would later envelop Leonard's story to influence her demeanor. She was simply a witness to truth, a guardian of life, and a reminder that dignity, observation, and courage can exist in places often overlooked. The events of that day would go on to challenge perceptions, not only of power and wealth but of race, class, and humanity. The narrative of who holds knowledge, who wields influence, and who saves lives was irrevocably expanded. Ruth's quiet heroism would eventually ripple far beyond the polished floors and executive offices, touching hearts, reshaping assumptions, and illuminating the profound truth that sometimes the most extraordinary courage is found in the most ordinary roles. Leonard woke up in the hospital room to the sterile hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic, a soundscape so ordinary yet life-altering when paired with the realization that he had been inches away from a tragedy. Sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, falling on his meticulously tailored suits folded neatly on a chair, remnants of the world he had rushed through, barely noticing its fragility. But today, Leonard could not move past the vulnerability of his own mortality. He had spent decades building empires, negotiating contracts, and commanding attention, yet none of it had prepared him for the quiet, unwavering vigilance of a woman whose job title rarely inspired recognition. Ruth Johnson, the cleaning lady who had seen what everyone else ignored. As nurses adjusted his monitors and checked his vitals, Leonard's mind wandered back to that morning. The subtle tremor in his hands, the flicker of worry he had tried to dismiss, the quiet insistence in Ruth's voice. It was unsettling, in a way that demanded reflection. He had been accustomed to authority, to being the one others deferred to. Yet here was someone, overlooked by society's standards, who had exercised true influence over his life. It forced him to confront a reality that was uncomfortable but profoundly human. Wisdom, courage, and moral clarity were not confined to corner offices, fancy degrees, or social status. By mid-morning, Ruth had arrived at the hospital, quietly slipping into the waiting area with her usual grace. She did not need an appointment or an invitation. Leonard had made sure the staff knew she had acted decisively, and they respected her presence. Her face carried the familiar lines of experience, strength, and quiet dignity, eyes reflecting both humility and unshakable confidence. Leonard, still recovering but alert enough to speak, motioned for her to come closer. "Ruth," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I thank you. I don't think I would be here without you." Ruth offered a small, understanding smile, nodding gently. "I did what I had to, sir. You were in danger, and I couldn't look away. That's all." But Leonard knew it was more than that. There was courage in Ruth's actions, yes, but also clarity. She had noticed what no one else would, and more importantly, she had acted on it despite knowing that her words might be dismissed by people who saw her as invisible. That was a kind of moral courage Leonard had rarely encountered, and certainly not in the form of someone society often overlooked. Over the next few days, as Leonard slowly regained his strength, he reflected on the dynamics of the office he had built. The employees he had once admired for their diligence and efficiency had overlooked the obvious signs of danger. Meetings went on, emails were sent, and power plays continued while he was suffering in plain sight. But Ruth had seen it. She had intervened without hesitation or expectation of reward, demonstrating a kind of awareness that transcended titles and salaries. It was an uncomfortable truth, but one he could not ignore. In a world obsessed with status and hierarchy, the most profound acts of heroism could come from those we least expect. Leonard requested to meet Ruth privately in his office once he was cleared to return. When she arrived, pushing her cleaning cart with the same quiet efficiency she always displayed, he gestured for her to sit. The office, usually a symbol of his control, felt different now, smaller somehow, humbled by the weight of recent events. "I want to make sure you know," Leonard began carefully, "that your actions have changed more than just my life. They've changed how I see people, how I see myself, and how I see the responsibility that comes with privilege." Ruth tilted her head slightly, listening. She had encountered gratitude before, often from colleagues or residents she cleaned for, but there was a difference in Leonard's voice. It carried sincerity, reflection, and a deep awareness that what he was saying could not be reduced to mere politeness. "I've always done my job the best I could," Ruth said softly. "But sometimes it's more than just cleaning. Sometimes it's about noticing, about paying attention to the details that others don't. That's all I did." "But it's extraordinary," Leonard insisted. "Extraordinary and rare. Most people would have walked by, pretending not to see. You didn't. You acted. You didn't just notice. You saved my life." The conversation settled into a quiet space, heavy with reflection. Leonard realized that the true value of Ruth's courage lay not in dramatics or heroics, but in the unwavering, almost instinctive moral compass that guided her actions. She had seen life for what it was, fragile, precious, and too easily overlooked. And in doing so, she had reminded him, and would remind anyone who heard this story, that heroism does not always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it whispers in the corridors, quiet but resolute, waiting for someone willing to act. News of Leonard's recovery spread quickly, and with it came recognition of Ruth's role. Yet, she remained as humble as ever, insisting that her duty was simple, that she had only done what any person should when faced with a life at risk. But Leonard could not let it go unacknowledged. He began to implement changes in his office. Protocols that ensured that employee concerns, no matter their position, were heard. Recognition programs that highlighted contributions from every level of staff. And, perhaps most importantly, a personal commitment to listen more, judge less, and value the perspectives of those who had long been invisible in his world. Ruth, meanwhile, returned to her routine with the same quiet dignity she always carried. Yet, there was a subtle shift in the way she moved through the office. Colleagues greeted her with respect, not just for her actions, but for the courage and integrity she embodied. And though she remained cautious, reserved, and humble, the ripple of her heroism was undeniable. In her presence, Leonard felt a constant reminder of the principles he often overlooked in the pursuit of power: awareness, empathy, courage, and the importance of seeing people beyond their assigned roles. In those weeks that followed, a bond quietly formed between Leonard and Ruth, not of dependency or patronage, but of mutual respect, understanding, and recognition. It was the kind of bond that transcends societal labels, that rises above wealth, race, and position, and instead honors the shared humanity that connects them. Leonard began to share Ruth's story cautiously, first within the company, and then through controlled channels that would eventually reach the public. Her actions sparked discussions about respect, recognition, and the value of voices too often ignored. And while the world would come to celebrate Ruth as a hero, as the woman who saved a millionaire's life, she herself remained grounded, reminding everyone who tried to elevate her that true heroism required no applause. It required attention, courage, and a willingness to act when no one else would. In doing so, she had not only saved a life, but challenged an entire system of assumptions, one quiet, determined action at a time. As news of Ruth's heroism began to quietly circulate within the company, Leonard found himself reflecting more profoundly on the systems he had built, the hierarchies he had enforced, and the blind spots that had allowed his life to hang in jeopardy unnoticed by those around him. The executive floor, once a temple of efficiency and authority, now seemed a landscape of overlooked humanity. The same people who would not have paused to notice a trembling hand or a pale face now spoke of Ruth in hushed admiration, their words tinged with guilt and awe. For Ruth, the attention was uncomfortable. She had spent her life blending into the background, moving through spaces unnoticed, her work judged by its results, not by the individual who produced it. Praise was rare, and when it came, it often felt disproportionate or performative. Yet, she could not deny a quiet sense of vindication. The affirmation that her instincts, her awareness, and her unwavering attention to the subtle signs of danger had tangible power. The life she had saved was not only Leonard's. It was a reminder of the dignity, worth, and presence of those whose voices society often ignored. Leonard, still recovering but deeply changed, insisted on taking steps that extended far beyond personal gratitude. He launched a company-wide initiative focused on listening and inclusion. Meetings were restructured to ensure that contributions from all employees, regardless of rank or title, were genuinely heard. Protocols were implemented to take health concerns seriously, even when they seemed minor or inconvenient. And in every step, Leonard made sure to acknowledge Ruth's role, not as a token gesture, but as the catalyst for a cultural shift that challenged entrenched hierarchies and assumptions. Yet public recognition was a double-edged sword. When Leonard's recovery story leaked beyond the company walls, the media quickly latched onto Ruth's heroism. Interviews were requested, cameras followed her into the office, and social media buzzed with admiration and speculation. While many celebrated her bravery, Ruth felt the weight of exposure keenly. She had not acted for fame, wealth, or accolades. She had acted because it was the right thing to do. Now, the world was scrutinizing her life, her background, her motives. Headlines praised her courage. Yet the subtle narrative of her everyday dignity risked being overshadowed by sensationalism. Leonard, recognizing her discomfort, became her steadfast advocate. He insisted that the coverage highlight her integrity, her intuition, and the quiet heroism that had saved his life, rather than reduce her to a viral story. He arranged for interviews to be conducted on her terms, ensuring she retained agency over her narrative. In these moments, Ruth saw a different side of power, a version that could amplify truth without silencing the individual. The irony was not lost on her. The same man who once epitomized authority and control now used his influence to protect, rather than dominate, her story. The public recognition also sparked difficult conversations within the office and beyond. Employees confronted their own complacency and bias. Many acknowledged, often with shame, how they had overlooked subtle signs of danger or distress because of assumptions about who mattered, whose concerns were legitimate, and whose intuition carried weight. Ruth's actions forced a reckoning, a reconsideration of how society values people, how attention is allocated, and how dignity is often withheld from those deemed peripheral. It became clear that heroism was not defined by status, but by the courage to act when others remain indifferent. Ruth herself remained remarkably grounded throughout the process. She continued her work with the same quiet diligence, tending to desks, floors, and corridors while maintaining a keen awareness of her environment. Yet the way she moved through the office had subtly shifted. Colleagues greeted her with respect, managers deferred to her insights, and employees who once ignored her presence now watched her with renewed attention. For Ruth, it was not about recognition. It was about a sense of justice quietly settling over her world, a tangible acknowledgement that her observations and actions mattered in a society that so often overlooked Black lives and voices. Leonard's own transformation became evident not just in policy changes, but in his demeanor. He approached his work with a humility previously absent, listening more than he spoke, observing more than he commanded. He began sharing Ruth's story publicly in forums where he had once only discussed profit margins and market strategies, emphasizing the importance of seeing humanity in every individual. Investors, colleagues, and competitors alike took notice, not because Ruth had saved Leonard, but because her courage illuminated a truth about awareness, dignity, and the moral responsibility of those with power. Yet amid the accolades and policy reforms, Ruth faced personal challenges. The sudden attention brought scrutiny into her private life. Questions about her family, background, and experiences were posed by reporters and curious onlookers. Some attempts at storytelling sought to sensationalize her past or minimize the seriousness of her intuition by framing it as a lucky guess. Ruth met these intrusions with calm dignity, deflecting sensationalism while maintaining the integrity of her narrative. She understood that her role was to demonstrate, quietly but undeniably, that her actions were rooted in observation, experience, and courage, not luck. Through all of this, Ruth's story became a catalyst for broader reflection on race, class, and societal assumptions. The world saw that heroism and moral clarity do not reside solely in the wealthy, the educated, or the highly visible. They reside in the quiet spaces, in the overlooked corners, in those whose lives are often deemed ordinary yet carry extraordinary insight. Her vigilance challenged implicit bias, confronted systemic oversight, and demonstrated that dignity, courage, and justice could emerge from any walk of life, irrespective of social standing. As months passed, Ruth's influence extended beyond the office. She began speaking at community events, not as a celebrity but as a teacher of awareness, a model of moral courage, and a living testament to the value of observing deeply and acting decisively. Leonard remained a steadfast ally, supporting her voice while learning from it, embodying a humility that was both transformative and inspiring. Together, they bridged worlds often separated by status, race, and expectation, demonstrating that true leadership involves seeing, listening, and valuing the humanity of all. In the end, Ruth Johnson's quiet heroism revealed something profound. That dignity, attentiveness, and courage are often invisible until they intersect with moments of crisis. That the power to save, to influence, and to change lives does not belong exclusively to the powerful, but to anyone willing to act when others look away. And while the headlines would celebrate the cleaning lady who saved a millionaire CEO, the deeper legacy was the awakening of awareness, the transformation of perspectives, and the affirmation that every human life carries the potential to impact the world profoundly. Months passed, and the initial media attention surrounding Ruth's heroism gradually settled into a deeper, quieter influence. Leonard had returned to the helm of his company, but he was no longer the same man who had walked the polished floors before his heart attack. He carried with him a humility and awareness born from vulnerability, a recognition that power and wealth, while influential, were no substitute for moral clarity and human attentiveness. Ruth, meanwhile, continued her work with the same quiet diligence, yet the office had irrevocably changed around her. Colleagues moved with an unfamiliar respect. Managers consulted her insight on matters beyond maintenance, and employees who once overlooked her presence now sought her perspective, recognizing that wisdom and courage do not announce themselves with titles. The relationship between Leonard and Ruth had deepened into a bond of mutual respect and trust. It was not a friendship born of convenience or necessity, but one forged in the crucible of shared experience and human connection. Leonard often invited Ruth to strategic discussions, not to alter decisions, but to offer observations and perspectives that had previously gone unnoticed. Ruth's input was subtle yet impactful. Her keen perception of human behavior, her attention to small but significant details, and her moral clarity contributed to decisions that became more compassionate, just, and effective. In this, both the CEO and the cleaning lady discovered a rare truth: that genuine leadership and genuine heroism are inseparable from humility and awareness of the humanity surrounding us. Outside the office, Ruth's life took on a quiet prominence she had never anticipated. Invitations to speak at community events and professional gatherings arrived steadily, each request handled with her characteristic humility. She shared her story not as a tale of personal glory, but as a lesson in attentiveness, moral courage, and the dignity inherent in every individual. Audiences listened, often moved to reflection, recognizing the uncomfortable truths she embodied. That society so often ignores voices like hers, that discrimination and prejudice blind people to value in unexpected places, and that justice and dignity are not abstract concepts but lived, observable acts. Leonard, ever mindful of her comfort, ensured that every opportunity was framed on her terms. Together, they emphasized that Ruth's actions were not miraculous accidents, but the result of acute awareness and moral courage. Her story became a vehicle to challenge assumptions about race, class, and visibility. Media coverage shifted from sensationalism to recognition of her insight and integrity. The narrative reframed the conversation. Heroism could not be measured by wealth, influence, or education. It was measured by action, awareness, and the willingness to stand when others turn away. Back at the office, changes implemented in the wake of Ruth's intervention became permanent cultural shifts. Health and safety protocols were reviewed and strengthened, with employees encouraged to voice concerns regardless of position. Recognition programs were expanded to honor contributions from all levels of staff, and leadership workshops included lessons on attentiveness, empathy, and humility, lessons inspired directly by Ruth's courage. Leonard himself became a vocal advocate for inclusive recognition, speaking publicly about the value of listening to voices often overlooked. The office, once defined solely by hierarchy and efficiency, had become a space where dignity, respect, and human awareness held as much weight as profit margins. Yet perhaps the most profound impact was personal. Ruth's actions reshaped Leonard's understanding of the world, prompting him to examine how privilege often blinds people to the humanity of others. He began mentoring young professionals, emphasizing the importance of observation, listening, and moral courage in leadership. In private moments, he reflected on the fragility of life and the extraordinary influence a single attentive person can have on another's survival. Ruth had not merely saved him physically. She had transformed the very way he engaged with people, decisions, and the responsibilities that came with power. For Ruth, the journey was one of quiet empowerment. She no longer moved entirely unseen, yet she remained grounded in the values that had guided her for decades. Attentiveness, courage, humility, and integrity. Recognition did not change who she was. It highlighted the strength she had always carried, the dignity she had always embodied, and the clarity of vision that had allowed her to act decisively when others looked away. In every conversation, every interview, every public appearance, she conveyed the essential truth that human lives are interconnected, that awareness carries responsibility, and that courage is defined not by the applause it earns, but by the lives it protects. Leonard often remarked that Ruth had saved more than just his life. She had saved him from a worldview confined to power and self-interest. Her intervention had forced a reckoning with assumptions, biases, and blind spots, showing him that leadership without attentiveness is incomplete, and that wealth without recognition of human dignity is hollow. In every boardroom discussion, in every strategic decision, the lesson of Ruth's courage lingered, a quiet reminder that heroism is not always dramatic, and that those who are most likely to act when others ignore the signs often occupy the spaces society overlooks. In time, Ruth's story became emblematic, referenced not only in media and corporate circles, but also in educational and community discussions. Schools and professional workshops used her example to teach lessons about attentiveness, empathy, and moral courage. She became a symbol of dignity in action, a living testament to the fact that respect, recognition, and justice are not conferred by status, but earned through consistent, courageous attention to the humanity around us. And yet, Ruth remained humble, continuing her daily work with the same care and thoroughness as ever. She did not seek fame, nor did she expect it. She acted because she saw a life at risk and refused to look away. Her heroism was inseparable from her integrity, her attentiveness, and her moral clarity. In saving Leonard Hayes, she had illuminated a larger truth: that dignity, courage, and justice can manifest in any form, from any walk of life, and that the impact of such actions resonates far beyond the immediate moment. When Leonard finally returned to the office for good, he greeted Ruth with a quiet reverence that went beyond gratitude. "You didn't just save my life," he said softly. "You changed it. And in doing so, you've changed all of ours." Ruth smiled, her response simple but profound. "I just saw what needed to be seen, sir. That's all any of us can do." In that exchange, the essence of the story became clear. Recognition, respect, and justice are not luxuries. They are obligations we owe to each other. Ruth Johnson, the woman whose job had been considered invisible by society, became a beacon of moral clarity, courage, and human dignity. She reminded the world that the power to save, to influence, and to uphold justice is not restricted to the powerful, the wealthy, or the prominent. It resides in the attentive, the courageous, and the principled, waiting for a moment to act when it matters most. Through her quiet vigilance, unwavering courage, and extraordinary moral clarity, Ruth had not only saved a millionaire CEO, she had reshaped perceptions, challenged biases, and illuminated a timeless truth: that every human life carries significance, and every attentive, courageous act can change the course of history. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring and heart-touching stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you.